to be looking at Module 2, Lesson 1. That is page 31 in your packet. So if you don't have that in front of you, you need to make sure you go and you get it and then turn the video back on to get started. Alright, so this week we are looking at how to add whole numbers and how to just think about it and talk about how you got your answer. Now last week I did mention to you in our Google Meets that we were going to be using rounding. We are going to do some rounding today to help us add these larger numbers together. So let's look at Spark Your Learning. In 2016, Washington's Port Townsend Coupeville Ferry had about 329,000 vehicle passengers and about 118,000 foot passengers. How many passengers rode the ferry in 2016? How can you write this using numbers only? So we're going to show our thinking. So we've got to be able to write this in numbers. Well, obviously, we know our two numbers. We have 329,000 and 118,000. But how do we show that in numbers? Some possible strategies or ways that you can write this is you can write 329,000 plus 118,000. Oh, let me take the S off. I don't want to put the S on there. Okay. Another way that we can write this is to find the answer. We can write this by just adding 329,000, so we know we're going to put 3 zeros after it, and then 118,000. We can do some rounding here, or we can just simply add. We know we're going to put 3 zeros. 9 plus 8 is 17, so we're going to carry our 1 over to the 10,000s. 1 plus 2 is 3. 3 plus 1 is 4. And then 3 plus 1 is 4. So we have 447,000 passengers on the ferry. So just ways to show your answer using numbers. That's what they're asking you to do. So you can simply just add the problem. You can write it out as 329,000 plus 118,000. Okay, so check your work. And now let's move on to page 32. So let's go to page 32 in your packet. We're going to look at build understanding. In 2015, North Dakota reported 545,027 licensed drivers, and Wyoming reported 422,450 licensed drivers. How many licensed drivers were there in both states? Use rounding as a strategy to show your answer is reasonable. So when you hear the word reasonable, it's telling you to really use rounding to show why your answer is correct, okay? So look down at our vocabulary before we get started with our problems and circle that vocabulary box. To estimate is to find an answer that is close to the exact amount. So today we're going to be using our rounding, which again we talked about last week. We said that rounding and estimation are pretty much the same thing. We are trying to get as close to the actual number as possible with both of those strategies. But let's look at this, what we have today. We are going to use a grid to help us solve this problem. Now a grid is a great way to keep your numbers lined up. So we're going to start on our ones and on the right side, and we're going to work our way to the 100,000s on the left. So we're going to start with the first number. We have 545,027 drivers. So we're going to put a 7 in the ones, a 2 in the tens, 0 in the hundreds, 5 in the thousand, 4 10,000, and 500,000. Okay, that's our first number. Now we're going to look at our second number. We're going to put it below that. We have a 0 in the ones, 5 in the tens, 4 in the hundreds, 2 in the thousands, 2 in the 10,000s, and 4 in the 100,000s. So make sure that you line those numbers up correctly. All right, and one thing I want to remind you, boys and girls, is when we are using this grid, when we're adding 3-digit numbers, and this is something you've been taught, kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade, but always start on the right side of your number. Always start with the ones and work your way to the left. Don't start on the left. Always start in the ones and work your way to the left when you're adding. So now, we have our grid completed. So the next thing we need to do is just simply add the numbers. So we have 7 plus 0, 7. 2 plus 5 is 7. 0 plus 4, 4. 5 plus 2, 7. 4 plus 2, 6. 5 plus 4, 9. So if we put a comma here in between the 7 and the 4, that would read 967,477. So we can fill in our sentence below the grid. There were 967,477 licensed drivers in both states. Now, let's take this a step further and let's look at A. Round each add-in to the nearest 10,000 and then add. Show your work. Now, if you remember, add-ins are the numbers you're adding together. So this is an add-in and this is an add-in. The two numbers from our word problem above, those are our add-ins. It wants us to round to the nearest 10,000. So here's our 10,000 in the grid. So we've got to look at those two numbers. Now we want to round the 4 and the 2. So in order to do that, we're going to go to the thousands and look at those two numbers. Now our rule last week was if it's 5 and above, we're going to round up. So for our first number, we have a 5 in the thousands. So we're going to round that 4 up to the next number, which is a 5. So we're going to round the whole number up to 550,000. 550,000. Now let's look at our second add-in. We have a 2 in the 10,000s place. So we're going to move over to the thousands and we have a 2 in there as well. So if our rule is 5 and above, we go up with our rounding. 4 and below, we go down. So we're actually going to keep that 2 the same here. So it's going to be 420,000 for the second add-in. So now we've rounded. It says add these two numbers together and show your work. So down on the line, we're going to say 550,000 plus 420,000, and my plus sign looks like a T, equals 970,000. Now if you want to check that, you can come up here and you can add it together. 3 zeros, 5 plus 2 is 7, 5 plus 4 is 9, so 970,000. So let's look at the next problem. About how many total licensed drivers were there in 2015? We would say about, I'm going to put that word about there because when we're estimating or rounding, we're not giving the exact number. So about 970,000. About 970,000. Let's look at B. Does your estimate show that your answer is reasonable? Explain. Again, when you're trying to show if your answer is reasonable, you're trying to show that your answer is a possibility. It can be correct. So does my estimate, 970,000, show that my answer, 967,477, is reasonable? I would say yes. Why? My estimate, 970,000, is close to 967,477. So my answer is reasonable. It is a possibility. Again, thinking about estimating and rounding, you're not getting an exact number. You're trying to get as close to that number as possible. And if we look at our two numbers here, I'm circling those now, you can see that 970,000 is very close to 967,477. So for B, we're going to say yes, and you need to be able to talk about why that is reasonable. So we're going to talk a little bit about that in our Google Meet the next day. Now what I would like for you to do is on your own to practice this skill, I want you to complete page 33. You're going to do step it out and check understanding. And when you're finished, you're going to click on the second video to check your work.